Hey guys, what's up? Serena here from thriftiving.com, and today we are going to spray paint an ugly brass lamp that I picked up from the thrift store. It was probably about $7. We are going to make it look fabulous, but before we can do any spray painting, let's go ahead and open up this bad boy. It's a spray shelter, and we are going to spray paint this a beautiful white. And let me show you exactly what we're going to do with the lampshade. We are going to cover it in pretty paper. I love covering lampshades. I'm going to show you how to do it. And I'm also going to tell you about today's sponsor, which is Skillshare, which is an online learning community for creators. There's business classes, photography, design, so many classes. So let's jump into this makeover right now. I did not see that cat. So that's one of our neighborhood strays. His name is Mr. Gray. That's what I've named him. He lets you get maybe 6 feet away and then he just runs away. Anyway, I've got this lamp set up in the spray shelter. This is really the best place to do spray painting because you don't want to get it all over your grass, all over your yard. Now, before you get started with any kind of project, whether you're spray painting or just painting, you have to get the right materials and you got to wipe it down. So definitely get some spray paint, some gloves, some sandpaper. You might have to sand just a little bit, and also a mask. That's very important because a lot of times these little fine particles are just floating in the air and you don't want to breathe that stuff in. So here we're not trying to remove the brass. We just want to get a little bit of a rough texture so that this paint is going to stick. Now I don't want to get any of the spray paint on those little parts, so I'm going to tape that off with some tape and then just wipe off all of the dust that was created from the sanding. So once that was wiped down, it was time to spray paint. Now here, you're probably wondering, do I need to use a primer? You can use a primer. There is a metal primer that you can use. I just went ahead and skipped it. I figured since I sanded it down a little bit, roughed it up, it was good. Just make sure that you're doing thin coats. Spray paint, it will run on you and it looks horrible when it runs. So just make sure that you're spraying this in 2 thin coats and not 1 thick coat. Okay, you're not going to believe this. So I came home from class. I had my light out so I could do 1 more thin coat, and look what I saw. Look at that spray paint just hanging in the air. And I'm not slowing this down. This is real time. These are heavy particles. So even if you're outside, use a mask because this stuff does linger in the air and it's not safe for us. Seriously. Okay, so I did spray the cord just so it matches. Just make sure you don't get it on the prongs. Now, before we move into the next part of this project, which is making the pattern and the cover for the lampshade, let me tell you about today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Now, you know me, I'm actually a carpentry student at my local community college, but I also do a lot of online classes too. And these are usually creative classes. So Skillshare is a place where over 7 million people can take creative classes, whether you want to do design, business. You can actually learn how to do YouTube videos on Skillshare. Yes, they're there. Now, the class that I'm taking right now is actually a design class. If you remember, there's an HGTV show called Design Stars, and Emily Henderson, she is one of the designers on that show. Well, she's actually got a class here on Skillshare, and I'm learning from her just different design tips. She teaches you about color, how to understand the color wheel and what colors look good together. And she also tells you if you do like cooler colors like I do, you have to kind of warm it up a little bit using things like wood, brass, leather. So these kind of tips are things that you can do to make your home really feel good. And there's really no rules of what you can bring into your home. You can choose different styles, but she does give you a range of guidelines to follow so that your home can look cohesive and balanced. Now, if you want to try Skillshare, they're actually giving away a free 2-month unlimited access trial to my subscribers who click the link in the description box. And after that, it's only about $10 a month. So, go ahead and sign up for that. You can also join workshops too. So I'm signing up for Emily's workshop and, trying to figure out my design style because sometimes I question it. So let's get back to this project. All right, so this is the lampshade that I found. It was $4 at the thrift store. And I'm not a big fan of cone-shaped lampshades. I usually like the drum shapes, but this one's great for demonstrations. So taking my paper, this is actually drafting paper, which is great for patterns. I'm going to take my lamp and I'm going to line it up with this. Now, the line you see there on the lampshade, that's just part of the lampshade. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on that line and line it up. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is very carefully, I'm going to create a path that this lampshade is taking, and I'm going to trace this out with my pencil. You see here that I'm starting at the top You want to be very careful that it does not get off that path. This is how we're going to create an exact pattern for this lampshade. Once I get to the end, and the end is when I reach that line that we were using, I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. And again, I'm going to take this same exact path. I'm going to roll it all the way around until I get to the very end, which is when we're going to get to that perpendicular line. Once we get to that perpendicular line, we'll use our ruler and connect those two lines, but then we want to put the lampshade right back at the end, and we just want to extend that line by just maybe about 1/2 inch. These are the seam allowances that we're going to add to this pattern, because remember, this is going to have to fit around our lampshade, and we need to at some point overlap it. Now, you don't have to overlap it if you have an exact pattern. You might be able to line those up perfectly, but that would be kind of difficult. So on the bottom part and the top part, I just freehanded an additional 1/2 inch to account for the seams that we'll need to be folding around. And this is what it should look like when we're done. You see that there are 1/2 inch seam allowances around the entire thing. I did a little test fit. It looks like it's going to work pretty good. And then it was time to pull out the fabric. Now, this is not fabric. This is paper. This is actually wrapping paper that I got from a store, but it's so thick that it's really like scrapbook paper, but it's just in a larger size. Now, the thing is, when you're putting several pieces together, you're going to have to overlap them or seam them up somehow. The easiest way that I figured how to do this was to try to put them together, and then you have to section off a little bit on the end. This is where they're going to overlap. And I was going to do this with some spray adhesive. Now, spray adhesive gets everywhere. So not only do you not want this in your house, you don't want it on your table, and you don't want it to get on the good side of the paper. So you see how I'm just sectioning off just a sliver. This is probably about 1 inch. And then I'm going to just spray that. Now, with this side sticky and ready, I could joint another piece of paper. Now, a couple things here. If you have a pattern, try to match it as best as you can. Secondly, I think I left too much of an overlap here. 1 inch is a little bit too much, and I'll explain to you in a minute why. I think I should have trimmed this down just a little bit more. Another thing, too, I'm using tape it's like for sensitive surfaces. So if you try this with regular tape, it will tear your paper. So look down below for the description for the materials list. Now, once the pattern was ready to go, the paper was joined, I had one huge piece of paper, it was time to cut it out. And so I did that very carefully, making sure that I didn't tear this. Remember, this is just paper. So when you're cutting, just be extra careful. You want this to look neat and clean. So once it was cut out, it was time to actually do some markings. So I did mark here on one of the corners, or not just one of the corners, one of the sides, where that line was. Because remember, that line is where it should match up on the lampshade. And that's going to be the starting point that we use to try to get this to match up perfectly. So I just wanted to make sure it was going to fit. So I wrapped everything just one more time, making sure that it was going to fit. It looked pretty good. But the next thing we needed to do was to draw a line on the back of the paper. Now remember, we were drawing those lines that had that 1/2 inch. I still want to make sure that I've got those same markings on the back, because that line on the lampshade has to line up with the line on the paper. And I just laid it out, just making sure that, okay, when I wrap this thing around, is it going to add up? So the hard part was just trying to get that line lined up perfectly, because everything was riding on that. So I did a very fine coat of the spray adhesive and joined it. Now this is where I started getting into trouble, because I laid everything out and just started spraying, which is fine. That's what you're supposed to do. But I noticed as I was I laid it out and was starting to roll, and I noticed that wasn't working too well, and I had some bubbles and it just was not going well. And I thought, oh my gosh. So you can see here, like I'm starting to try to pull this off, and I'm so afraid my paper is going to rip because I had already put so much time and effort into this. Thankfully, it started to come out and I was able to, reposition this. It was difficult to figure out how to get this on in the correct position. Do I stand it up? Do I lay it down? And then what I ended up finding is that just kind of laying it on its side and getting it into place worked really well. And this is why it's so important to get that first line lined up properly based on how you did your pattern. And once I got to the end, I did want to do a little bit more spray adhesive to that back flap. So I laid it down on the table, did another little coat of spray, and then adhered it. Now check your spray on the back and the directions, because sometimes they tell you if you lay it down immediately within 15 seconds, it's a permanent bond. If you give it time to set, then it's more of a temporary bond. I would say follow your instructions and do a temporary bond. That way, if you mess up, it's easy to pull it off. Now, the next thing I wanted to do is to fold this part under. This is where you have to be careful because you don't want any bumps. So you have to make sure you're pulling it tight, but not tight enough that you're going to rip it. Now at the top, you'll notice that I was taking the scissors, just making some relief cuts. This is so I would be able to bend these and get them in there secure. Now to cover them up, you can use like a bias tape. I was a little not sure what I was going to do. So here's what I did. I laid the pattern out, and remember I had that 1/2 inch seam allowance. I just kind of used that as a pattern and cut out a little strip following that same pattern. And that was going to be perfect for the top. So I sprayed that with some spray adhesive, and you'll notice that it's very short. That's because I'm having to work around these metal parts. So I only did one section at a time and got that into place, just trimming it around the metal, and then did the other parts as well. Now here's the thing, just make sure that you're making this really tight because you don't want any gaps showing from the top of the lamp. I also did the same thing for the bottom inside edge of the lamp, again using that 1/2 inch seam allowance as kind of a pattern, and just cut out a strip that I knew would fit nicely on the inside of the lamp. And I sprayed it down with some spray adhesive and then just made sure that I covered all those raw edges. Now, here's the thing, when I was done the lamp, I'm like, I don't know if I really like this. I think it needs something. So I had some bias tape and thought, oh, let me just spray some bias tape. No, the spray adhesive was messy. So I thought, okay, glue gun, this is what's going to work. Now, glue guns are great because it's just an instant bond, but make sure you're only doing 1 or 2 inches at a time because that glue dries so quickly, the bias tape will not hold. I do like how the bias tape just gave it a little bit of oomph. It just kind of highlighted that beautiful floral. But also, glue guns can get messy too. So just be very careful that you're not over gluing. Last but not least was checking the lamp to see if it actually worked. Now this should have been the first step, but I don't know, sometimes you do things out of order, but it worked, thankfully. Now this is what the lampshade looked like before. It was $4 from the thrift store, and it turned into this cute little floral lamp. Now I'll admit, this is not my favorite style of shade. Again, I like more modern drum shapes, but just to show you that you can create a beautiful lamp with something from the thrift store that you really probably would walk past any other day. But with a little bit of spray paint and some paper and some spray adhesive, you can create something that's really unique for your family, for your home, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. Now the lamp, actually, I believe it was $10. I thought it was $7, but it was $10. So $4 for the lampshade, $10 for the lamp, that's $14. The paper was $10, so that's $24 for a unique lamp. You can't buy that anywhere. I mean, that's a great deal. Now here's one thing. I love the way it looks with the light on. But remember the seam I told you? You will see your seams, so be very careful with those. If you have seams like I ended up having, make sure that you're turning them around to the back so that nobody can see them, or just have smaller seams, or if you have large sheets of paper, you may not even have a seam depending on the size of your lampshade. So just keep those things in mind. A big thanks to our sponsor, Skillshare. Again, you can get 2 free months if you sign up down below with the link just for you as my subscriber. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next video.